We're back again in the mitten state. One more time at the top of America. We're fiddling around in the pews, but for all the wrong reasons, as another Michigan church exposes sex pests.
Today, we're heading back to a very familiar place, Liberty University. In 2019, they hosted a conservative political action conference, and the musical superstar was Zachary Radcliffe, a graduate of Liberty University. So the institution and its president, Jerry Falwell, the famous pastor charged with sex crimes who's still serving as a leader, were all extremely proud of his musical performance. But the university and the church where Radcliffe preaches have since cut ties with him due to the not very shocking news that he has been charged with sex crimes against children, including at least 4 counts of child sexual abuse and charges of using the internet to communicate with another to commit a crime. He's facing up to 25 years in prison and is currently being held on a $3 million bond in Washtenaw County Jail in Ann Arbor, Michigan. This story is from The Friendly Atheist by Herman Mehta on October 23rd, 2024.
Deep breath, everybody. Sigh. Something's in the water, it seems. I turn up on these shows, and it seems that we're uncovering yet another Michigan-sized sex pestery scandal to dwarf the Flint water crisis, or to dwarf Kwame Kilpatrick and his corruption in downtown Detroit. I don't understand it. I just don't get it. What is it that country music, Christian church, and paedophilia all seem to have in common with each other, and being a, quote, conservative? What is it? What is it when you mix those 4 things together that you get this really toxic nonsense coming out of it that just does not seem to gel with reality? How? I just don't understand that.
Well, I really wish I could say I'm surprised, but I'm not. Pedophiles and pederasty have been seen in, and the pedophiles themselves have been using churches for access to vulnerable children for literally thousands of years. There are records from both Greek and Egyptian writings, so it goes back several thousand years, since probably advent of priesthoods and churches, because they have, it's a power dynamic between somebody who is in a position of authority and granted a certain amount of immunity from ever being looked into or asked about, questioned about their behavior, that they get a chance to do what they want, and then they can hide it very easily by just explaining to the child they've just...
There's like a pattern of protection around those people that are accused of abuse, right? But it's a larger problem. To me, it seems like this whole ideology of pushing for purity often seems to overshadow the sense of bringing out transparency and accountability, and that you don't get that from the church. It's like they.
One of the other things with that is that they don't have to be transparent, but they also don't. They're repressed sexuality themselves because the church and the purity culture makes them repress all their urges and tell them that's evil and bad. So they fester, in their unconscious and in their conscious minds, they fester. And I just think that that's part of the problem, is that these people have a philosophy of life that isn't allowing them to be fully themselves. And therefore, they have to outlet that energy and that emotional energy in another direction. And they want to have power over it. So it becomes a power dynamic. The children are under their power, so they can abuse them and get away with it. And then the church itself will hide them.
It's a racket. It's an absolute racket.
It's a racket. Yeah, it is a racket. Exactly.
It's an absolute racket of just spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. And I don't know how on earth we're ever expected to be able to trust the church with safeguarding. How on earth do we trust this organization called the church, where we have people that can move around different churches and just continue in different areas? That's the biggest thing.
For me, I would say that the only people that trust the church with safeguarding the church and the people in the church are the same people that are abusing the women and children. Like, they put up a front, like a mask that makes it seem like they are on the side of the victims, and all the while covering up these tracks of the abusers that are committing these horrible sex crimes generally, right? And the saddest part to me is that when they're outed, generally, as we've seen in past stories, like Jerry Fowler himself, the abusers are the ones that are being victimized. They're like offering forgiveness and salvation, and the victims suddenly become like these monsters that must be shunned and ashamed, like it's just like, I don't know, out of us outside of it.
As a right-wing group, the churches often say when something else they're complaining about is think of the cute children, but then when their own children are being abused, they double victimize them. They turn them into, they victimize them again. It's always their fault. How is a child at fault for being molested? That's not their fault. And just because the other guy was, if you can't control your temptation, get the hell out of the church. Get the hell out of any contact with kids.
That's interesting because they use the whole purity culture idea with the children, like, they're wearing something revealing or they're being too forward. But they don't use the same purity culture standards for the abusers. Like their temptation, is just they're being put as the victim there. It's just horrible.
So the question that I have to ask now is, and this is going to be quite on the nose, this question is it a problem with churches attracting right-wing white men to them who seem to be the demographic that keep on coming up as child abusers, right-wing white men in churches, Jehovah's Witnesses, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Church, and so on? They all seem to fit a very strong pattern of right-wing to very far right-wing, politically active or high up in these groups, white men. I don't mean to sound as if I'm stereotyping here, but the evidence is quite circumstantially overwhelming here that white men who are politically conservative, who are involved in the church...
Privileged. They're privileged, so they have a right to do whatever they want, and people don't have a right to complain about them. They're privileged. And our society makes them privileged, which is silly. Nobody should be above the law. Nobody should have the right to abuse anybody and just say, oh, gee, I'm sorry, I'll pray for forgiveness and it'll be all okay. No, it will never be okay for that child, okay? They just had a trauma that is going to last their whole life. That's not fair to them to then turn around and saying, well, they were this or they were wearing that. Children wearing clothing is not a provocation for pedophilia or pederasty. I'm sorry, it's not.
It's no different to on a night out, say, well, she was wearing a dress, she was wearing a short skirt, she was wearing high heels. It's exactly the same kind of nonsense. So how on earth do the two of you think we move the sex pests out of churches?
That's a hard question to answer, really. I'll let you go first, Jonathan.
Reporting, I think. You have to educate the children to know that A, that's not acceptable from anybody, and B, they need to tell their parents immediately. And the parents have to feel safe, because they might be upset about getting ostracized from their church or kicked out or something like that, which, of course, JWs do quite frequently, and so do Mormons. So it's like the idea that they might lose their entire family and community by reporting somebody who's doing damage and violence upon their children. They need to be able to get over that too, and that needs some sort of support from the society at large, in order for that to happen. And I'm just afraid that will probably never really occur, which means that the kids themselves should know that they can call 911, they can call whatever number we want to give them if they're having that kind of problem, and let the police investigate it. And the police aren't going to let them get away with it, because it's a little feather in their cap if they can capture these people. So, they'll want to help them.
But what the problem?
Program not to say anything, they're not going to.
Yeah, what the problem is, what we were just discussing a moment ago, where the abusers are the ones being made to seem like the victim. And so the actual victims don't want to speak up because they think that, they're going to be shamed for it, and that their abusers are going to be put on a pedestal and, being offered forgiveness, and they are just going to look like horrible horrible people, So I don't know exactly how we solve that side of the problem, but I absolutely agree with you on reporting.
Yeah, you have to get the people involved to understand that it's not about their religion. It's about damaging a child.
So how is it that religion is allowed to get away with this? I don't understand this.
And they complain about everybody else.
And they complain about that no one is as pious as thee except thee who is more pious than thou. Kind of crap that you see floating around. Oh, I'm above all of this, holier than thou bollocks that we have going around on these things. When you have these double standards of complaints against women doing what women do because that tempts the men. You have their attacks on the LGBT community because it's outside God's creation, whereas they then find it quite happy to go and, do something that you really should not be doing to children. This kind of double standard is the disgrace of all of this. And getting away with this, as the church keeps doing year after year after year, decade after decade, is not acceptable.
You know what the irony is here is that Zachary's father is actually a pastor at the same church. And they fervently condemn trans people very publicly.
And this is the nonsense of it all. This is the nonsense, the complete self-absorbed nonsense of it all, is that you step out of line because you're gay, something you have no choice in. You step out of line because you're trans, again, something you have no choice in. You are an inferior individual because you're a woman, again, something that you have no choice in. And
they were saying, things like accusing trans people of being immoral and claiming that the parents of trans children who affirm them are actually abusing the children. But Zachary's father made absolutely no mention of the child sexual abuse allegations that his son was facing in several of the Sunday services following the suspension and arrest of his son. It's kind of like just, sweep it under the rug and maybe no one will notice.
But here's the next question is, are churches legitimate employers? Do you believe a church is a legitimate employer?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I mean, I think it's just...
Then what is it that they're doing? Then what is it that they're doing? Because if they're not a legitimate employer, then what can they actually do in terms of disciplining somebody here? If they're not a legitimate employer, what can they do?
They let them go. But there are some churches that are much older have what they call canon law, and their ministers or priests are subject to discipline by the church, which is something we don't know about because they do it in their sacraments, blah blah blah. But most modern churches, that were created in the 1800s and after the Protestant Reformation, they just in the 1500s, they just they don't have an internal. They may or may not have an internal system of ethics that they enforce. But when something like this comes along, they may just make something out of whole cloth, or they have counseling for the gentleman, or the pastor, prayer sessions for him, and all this other non-functional crap.
Save his soul. His soul has been infected by the devil, and the devil is infecting him to do all these evil things. No. Absolutely
he's just
no.
An evil person, sorry. And the thing is that we just allow this to happen because of our delusional, or I don't want to say that, should think of another word for it, but our hypnotic attachment to religious experiences, which really don't exist except in your mind and can be replicated fairly easily on your own. You don't need that structure to do it. But, it's just... We just get all fascinated with the pomp and circumstance and the ritual and that sort of thing. And then we forget to pay attention to the sleight of hand they're doing with your kids.
So around the panel, what exactly do we need to do to start to root this out of the churches? Because it just seems to be that every time I'm on, we're discussing this on at least one, if not two, of the articles. But what do we actually need to do here?
Well, I was horrified by reading the actual charges for this. So, I question, what exactly could they have done to prevent it, right? And when you think about it, apparently the background check was not enough. There has to be some kind of other type of oversight, because Radcliffe, he was appointed as the teen and worship director for the whole church, for the church, right? The programs. So he was in direct contact with all of these children. He had access to all of these kids more than likely by himself, as music classes are usually just the teacher and the kids. And apparently he had been soliciting inappropriate pictures of victims as young as 12 years old, all the way up to 17. And he has been doing this since 2014. So this happened over a span of 10 years. How did nobody notice in 10 years that this was happening? Not even the kids did not feel comfortable enough to go to their parents, to go to another somebody in a leadership position. We have to make sure that the kids feel comfortable enough that they know that they're going to get justice and not be blamed for it.
But now they know that they're going to be blamed for it. And so how do you get that culture changed so that the children feel comfortable to report these people? I don't know how you get that. Because if they're going to homeschooling or to some private school and they're not getting the information they need because they don't get, due to their purity culture, they don't get any information on what sexual abuse is, how are they supposed to, they're kept in this kind of insulated bubble of you have nowhere to run.
Yeah, it's just, it seems to be cyclical. Yeah. You get rid of one and a new one turns up. You move this one on to somewhere else and it just moves on and on. And I think that this is the most damaging part of it all, is that it's got, well, frankly, sod all to do with the actual church and what the church is trying to teach here. Because doing good works and all this, yeah, that's great. Believing in, make-believe stories from a book, that's fairly harmless. But, kiddie fiddling, that's a serious issue here. And being a sex pest and then projecting and blaming and then protecting those people, that is disgusting. That is straight up disgusting. And this is why there are a number of people who hold the church not to be these pillars of community, but to be these pillars of destruction within communities. And we have to stop beatifying, and we have to stop worshipping, and we have to stop holding on pedestals these churches beyond what they actually are. And that is a group of people getting together and reading a book and talking about a book. And that's it, straight up. That's all it is. They go into a room, they read a book, they drink some wine in some cases, they light some incense in some cases, and they all sing some songs. Great. That's not the be-all and end-all, and it's not going to, quote, save your soul. And anyone who tries to save my soul from all that can go and sod off, because you're giving protection to pedophiles, protection to sex pests, and protection to predators, because you have put a book between you and your morality, and you say the morality comes from your book and not from you. And if you were to actually turn around and go, my morality comes from me, and I think this is absolutely disgusting, you would have a completely different attitude than if you were to say this book says it's fine, and this book will absolve you, and I don't have to do anything because I then don't feel uncomfortable because someone that I look up to or somebody that I consider a friend is a nasty predator.
Yeah, I think that's fairly well said. These people just need to wake up and smell the coffee, people. You're letting your kids into dangerous situations with no remorse of doing it. And when they do get found out, then you're all upset. And then you turn out to, it's just ridiculous. But, there's nothing more we can do about it except keep making sure that when we find out about it, we do something about it.
And if your morality has to come from the threat of eternal damnation, from a God telling you what is good and what is bad, then that means that you as a person, you are not good. You're just on a leash. You're on a leash. That's it.
And if you want to get lost in eternal damnation, you can go and search our back catalogue right here, and you can get lost in that.